Lama Chöpa, Lama Chökyi
Good evening. We're continuing to look at the Lama Chöpa text, and we're within the section where we're looking at how to cultivate bodhicitta. The cultivation of bodhicitta in particular, when it's developed to the point of being uncontrived, this is the doorway to entry into the Mahayana Dharma. If one has generated uncontrived bodhicitta, one is a bodhisattva, one has given rise to the Mahayana Dharma within oneself. If one has not yet generated uncontrived bodhicitta, one is not yet able to call oneself a bodhisattva. So how does one generate bodhicitta? Bodhicitta, this mind of enlightenment, is a result that has come about in dependence on causes. The specific cause that is generated is that of compassion. Through generating compassion, the altruistic attitude of universal responsibility is then generated. And thereafter, that is cultivated until bodhicitta is generated. And in order then to give rise to bodhicitta, which has as its cause compassion, there are two methods: the 6 cause and 1 effect method, and the equalizing and exchanging self with others. This text focuses on cultivating bodhicitta through equalizing and exchanging self with others.
That is in the Shen Yawa do you look your one, Nipa Mel Sue, and Shen Jebber Sinje, Sidan Ran Yawa do. Sidan, be some Jebber is it. That thing around you the Ran Jebber Zimbi, Luchi, Chimbuchi, Di, Shen Duma Karina, Shinchikar Kamantene, Delta, Yawa to Shep, and Shen Savacheta, Kamante Jingurba. Then this some of the Dorje, Shen, the Savache, Shen, Yobjet. Yawa to Dorje, Shen Rang Jebatsman, Shen the Pajabazi. That Shen Jebatsin or Duta, Shen Udola, Dendala, Ranika, the Karashan, the Kari, Yon Kare, the Kamaka Zitevina, Chikins and Begida, Rang Yawa to what it. Indeed, Gong research, some of the key or recipe, what that is not Shen Jebatsin, the key or recipe.
In the training within the method of equalizing and exchanging self with others in order to generate compassion, the indispensable cause to generate bodhicitta, one needs to recognize the role that the self-cherishing mind, or better translated as grasping at oneself as dear, plays within our life, as well as the faults that follow from placing ourselves, our own self-interest, first and foremost. This attitude of grasping at oneself as dear is something we are deeply habituated to. It's deeply ingrained within us. Here, the practice of exchanging refers to exchanging this self-obsession with placing the needs of others first and foremost, exchanging the grasping at our own self-interest as first for placing or holding others as dear, placing their needs first and foremost. This is the exchange that is referred to in equalizing and exchanging self with others. This is done through reflecting again and again on the faults of grasping at oneself as dear, and the benefits of reducing and eventually abandoning it through cultivating, holding others as dear. And to the extent that one habituates oneself to this understanding, then in all circumstances, using mindfulness and introspection, we will ensure that the self-cherishing attitude is not what is motivating us, what is driving us, but rather we sincerely have the welfare of others first and foremost in every action. Just like in ancient times, before the advent of money, trade was conducted with a system of bartering. So this is quite similar in the sense that in ancient times one would exchange some valuable items for other items that one values. Here, what we are exchanging is one way of thinking for another way of thinking. Exchanging this self-cherishing, the self-obsession for holding others as dear. So this is what we're exchanging here, two ways of thinking. To be able to engage in exchanging the attitude of grasping at oneself as dear for the attitude of holding others as dear, it's indispensable that one first engages in the training of equalizing. Hence, in the name of this practice, it's called equalizing and exchanging self with others. The starting point is that of equalizing. So in order to train well in equalizing, one needs to go far beyond just the thought of, well, in the same way I want to be happy, so too do others. One needs to go much, much deeper than that. So as mentioned in our last class a couple of weeks ago, one needs to recognize that yes, all beings want to be happy, just like me. All beings want to be freed of suffering, just like me. There is no difference on this level. But actually, the happiness that we have experienced, this has never satisfied us. Every pleasant experience we've had, every joy we've attained in terms of having things go our own way or achieving goals and aspirations, none of this has ever satiated us due to the lack of contentment. No happiness we've experienced has ever lasted or been sufficient. Moreover, in terms of suffering, the mere recognition that all beings want to be free of suffering, that we need to take deeper, just like with happiness. Recognizing that even slight suffering that is recognized as being impermanent and will pass, is unwanted, and people do, or beings do, what they can to avoid it. So there we take the understanding that all beings will be happy and free from suffering, and look at it in finer detail. The second level of the meditation includes reflecting on impermanence. In terms of impermanence, one's own aggregates as well as the aggregates of others are the same in being impermanent, changing momentarily, the body and the mind. Take this understanding and look at its implications. And furthermore, a further way within this level of investigation is to see, in terms of selflessness or emptiness, there is no difference between self and others. In the final way of existing, they are empty of inherent existence, but exist merely labeled by mind. So therefore the concept of self and other exists merely labeled by mind. And the way to approach this is to use an illustration such as near and far. The concept near and far does not exist from its own side. It's rather interdependent, in that something can only be near in relation to something far. Likewise, self and other.
진짜 현재를 주되어 지라 지고임을 초바 지라 지라 내리에서 세대 다 다도진 지들 현지에서 바게와 체리 이 개발 개미도 이가 내 수불에 랍시나 아니 파시잖아 자주로 와서 올다.
Those were some of the steps in the meditation on equalizing that I mentioned last time when we were together. Further, when one engages in this practice of equalizing, what one is trying to do is break down this sense of isolation and self-importance that we have, which comes from feeling separated from others, other than others. So we can take our own body, because this is something we have a strong self-identification with. This is my body. And likewise, in terms of others, we'll recognize this is that person's body. So there's strong identification here. But if we think about it just briefly, we recognize that this body of mine came from our parents. From our parents, from the sperm fertilizing an egg, this body came about. Immediately then by reflecting on this well, it can start to break down the sense of isolation that comes from relating to this body as inherently mine. Whereas we rather come to see its interdependence with others. This body has come about independent on others.
밤에기 그거 뉴벌에 때문에 대려 내일이 바다샤가지만은 아니 대려 현지의 현지의 바다샤가지만도 되는 유원의 세바다 개발매로 밤에 현지의 되는 요 현지의 이게 뒤태인 네 규제가 내용화돼 지바 책으로 와나.
If you have siblings, if not, you can imagine as if you were, because there it's very clear. Siblings, they came about in their bodies came about independent on the same parents. So from the same parents, different children were born. So whilst they relate to their body as a mine, and therefore see others as separate and different, actually, all the siblings within a family, their bodies came about independent on the same set of parents. Through these reflections, we try to break down this sense of isolation that comes from othering, feeling we are separate and isolated from others. Because it's very easy to go through life thinking how suffering that befalls others is not really my problem. Suffering that befalls others doesn't really harm me. Therefore, it's not my responsibility. It's not my problem. Such a way of thinking is ethically a little bit dubious, but also it can be challenged logically by saying, so if you're saying that that body over there, what happens to it, because it doesn't affect me, is not my concern, I don't need to be bothered by it, it's not so different from saying, I don't need to prepare now for my old age, because the body of one's aged body doesn't yet exist. So one would therefore, it would be logically consistent to say, I don't need to prepare for my old age because that body is not connected to me right now. It doesn't exist right now. So we can see the fallacy of this argument too, and reflecting on it. It will help break down this feeling, this way of thinking that the problems of others are not really my responsibility. As with other meditations, through relying on reasons, and relying on many reasons, and repeating these meditations again and again, this sense of separation, of seeing others as disconnected from us, will break down, and we'll start to see the sense of equality, or equalizing rather, between all beings will grow more innate within us, or more natural within us. Now we come to the 91st verse, which is in the middle of page 16. Please bless me to perceive that this chronic disease of cherishing myself is the cause giving rise to my unsought suffering. By blaming and begrudging it, may I destroy the great demon of self-grasping.
Yunden Tona Jala, Yun, the Jala Niji, Diligent, Yun Mongoshi, Jala Yunden, the Yorset, the nation Jala, Yun, Yunden, Tombana, Tanga, Harajigas, Jala, Yunden, Yugendi, Damgrima, the Yun, Yugen, Mogolai, China, Dina, she. 나도 삼로 나오야 랑제 버지미게 삼로 대당 현제 버지미 삼로 이보디 가지데 랑제 버지미 균 제버지미로디 균 통고마 연대전야 통하는 거로 와균 통고마 그래서 랑제 버지미 균 되는데 여러에서 균이 삼당 균 되는 용도와 그 제버지 삼당 단에 랑제 버지미로래 균 친구 너주시고 통하도 그래서 랑제는 요로 고민도 선배게 내가 써야게 뒷바디래 거래 현재가 지금로래 연대된 마들에 연대 도스에 삼당 연대 통해도 다딩할 고도 디로딩할 기초도 공부도 고도 선배게다 이 돈이 뒷바디 거래 제가 되네자 현재로 깨야 탑람이야 대신 내말이 냐고면 시사로 다들 랑제가 지금로래 교인가는 교인 다야 현재가 지금 연대 삼당이 이송 거든요.
This verse is about the faults of, or this verse guides us to come to recognize the faults of grasping at oneself as dear and the benefits of holding others as dear. So this approach of seeing the faults and benefits in relation to a meditation topic is utilized throughout the Lamrim, because this is how we largely live our lives. If we thinking about what course of action to pursue, or if we're wanting to perhaps purchase something, we will go through a process of analysis, thinking about the benefits of a particular approach, the faults of a different approach, weighing these two together, seeing which is better, and then we'll proceed with our life in a particular direction, or we'll buy a particular item. That's the same approach taken in the Dharma. By seeing the faults of something, we will develop the strength of mind to be aware, be mindful at all times, to not come under the influence of such a way of thinking. And conversely, by seeing the benefits of a particular mind, we will ensure that that mind is what guides us. So this then is how one generally approaches the various topics of the Lamrim, and here it's in relation to grasping at oneself as dear, as opposed to holding others as dear.
Support Nazishan, Daya Unimed, Nadia, Naziorova, the other John Nessigova. On Dinashi, Ram chasing loading out to be John Nasis. Now, so Cadiola, Jawamani, Kedina, Mani, Ram Chebas and Lodi Kedina, Yobares. She's not digging onto the Kama, Chico, she's not Ram chasing John Nasis. That is Ram chasing Guin, some tango water, Guin some tango water.
The verse starts out by referring to the grasping at oneself as dear, so that to remind the meditator here, reflect on the faults of grasping at oneself as dear. It starts with this chronic disease of cherishing myself. So the term chronic disease is used explicitly or for a particular reason. A disease inflicts tremendous pain and suffering. And a chronic disease does so over a lengthy period of time. The pain and the suffering that the grasping at oneself as dear has inflicted has been over lifetimes. And it's a disease that is not going to go away. It's not going to heal on its own. The way it afflicts us is that we are obsessed with fulfilling our own needs, first and foremost, my happiness, my freedom from suffering. And this plays out in our thought patterns and resulting verbal communication and behavior. This is the chronic disease that causes us so much pain. Chronic disease causes constant pain and discomfort, physical as well as mental. And this chronic disease of self-cherishing has afflicted us for lifetimes. When we look here, we're encouraged to look at the relationship of the self-cherishing and all our problems. All our unwanted pain and misery has come from our self-cherishing. There is no exception. All our pain has come from this attitude.
And Dinigi members Chidana Ramon to Samata Chidana Tayo Nasi Provada, then Kundu to Nasi Yoga. Then it meets Chebatsimulo said, and they call it to Unity Chagore. So the Ram Jason said, Nalonia, you have a Chagore.
To understand the grasping at oneself as dear, this attitude of self-cherishing, it has two components. One is a wrong consciousness, and the other is factually concordant. The component of the self-cherishing attitude, that is a wrong consciousness, grasps at the self as existing in the way that it appears, as existing by way of its own nature or essence. So this is a wrong consciousness, because the self does not exist by way of its own nature or essence, despite appearing as such. So this is one aspect of the self-cherishing mind, and it is a wrong consciousness. The second aspect, which is factually concordant, is in relation to the conventional I, the general I that we speak about, or the general I or self that we speak about. So this is the factually concordant aspect of the self-cherishing mind. It's good to understand the difference, these two different components of the self-cherishing attitude. Because the self-cherishing attitude is not abandoned by the practitioners who are hearers and solitary realizers, yet they attain liberation from samsara. So a foe destroyer, a hearer or solitary realizer foe destroyer, they have abandoned the ignorance of self-grasping because they have attained liberation. They've attained nirvana, liberation from samsara, but they still have the self-cherishing attitude. And this is because of these two components. The one that is a wrong consciousness, grasping at the self as existing in the way that it appears, in other words, self-grasping, this has been completely eradicated. Hence, they have attained liberation. But they chose to attain their own liberation rather than strive to become a Buddha. So this is the expression of the factually concordant self-cherishing attitude, the conventional I, which served to place their needs first and foremost. So that will still exist, but the ignorance of self-grasping has been completely abandoned. So this is the case for hero and solitary realizer, foe destroyers. So these are great practitioners. For example, when they realize emptiness before becoming foe destroyers, and they realize emptiness directly. So again, we talk about the hero and solitary realizer, foe destroyers, who are striving for their own individual liberation. So not foe destroyers. At this point, they're still heroes, Arya beings. So they've realized emptiness directly, and they realize that the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of true existence and exists merely labeled by mind. So this is factually concordant. And then they continue with, I want to achieve liberation. This I that does not exist from its own side, but does exist merely labeled by mind, so it's the conventional I. This is a factually concordant understanding. Allez, on a tout dit. L'objet. The practitioners at our level, really what is arising is this grasping at the self as existing in the way that appears by way of its own essence. This is what arises continuously, thinking of oneself. This is our grasping at the self as being truly existent.
Leana Bassa the Mahomana Dumayagi, Duma Gumicha, Jeza, Duma Chasa, you also Gudigares and Ranches in the S, Video Dumaki, Gurton, do some time, Ranches in the Video Duma Chasa, you also give Zawadi Diresha, said we do Chevachin, the Tongo, Reset.
Just to conclude with looking at the hero and solitary realizer practitioners. So whilst they have abandoned the element of the self-cherishing mind that is the wrong consciousness, completely abandon it, and just have the factory concordant part, nevertheless, this serves as an obstacle for them to place the needs of others first and foremost. Now for us, when we relate to this verse, and we see here the chronic disease of cherishing myself, we understand this as really referring to our ignorance of self-grasping. This chronic disease that causes us that causes all our physical and mental pain and anguish, all the suffering that we have experienced and are experiencing, comes from this ignorance, from grasping at the self as being self-existent, existing by way of its own nature. Then attachment arises, wanting for the self, or anger arising, wanting to repel from the self. So the afflictions all arise from this ignorance, and from the afflictions we suffer. We create causes for future suffering, and through the expression of these afflictions, we directly harm others. All the afflictions, not just anger and attachment, but pride, doubt, jealousy, they all arise from this ignorance. All the problems and troubles that disturb our mind comes from this ignorance. And the problems and difficulties that we heap upon others comes from this ignorance. This is the chronic disease that has plagued us since beginningless time, lifetime to lifetime, keeping us bound in chains of suffering. This here is what is to be reflected on.
And the chicken, you never chair, indeed, and it Shall never shall not see you got come out in the new us the quantity. It's not that diggy, that Shan, the new year, and Shan saw Chopa so much ever, diggy land ambassador, give a chima in there to my papa, check to us. She's on quantity. The D carry almost ranches in the little key was. She's not quantity. She's a quantity beauty, ranches in the key. Just Johnny, the ne diamond, that's it. Gitina Kamaya Chungurua. Chungni is never diamond, that's it. Chungni is another diamond, that's the Yoban. Gitina Kamate Chungurua. Dinashi, that Chungni and Ashi, the round chasing the Yoba in that, they let the corner get the loose in the Rashi, the Kamate, Mohopana Kamate Jungu. But then it do shaki, do shak the dinner, Rashinika Kamate. Yeah, round chasing the keep. My Jackie would do. My Jackie got a cynical Kamate, Dumano, Medio Chazan, they are the ranches in the Kigo. Chazada, the nigger Chazan, Yomo, but yeah, Chazan, Zawa, the ranches in the Kigo. Chazada ranches in Gun, the next to us and big Lucian sometimes ranches in Gun, Tongo, and double resident.
This first line again. This serves as the inspiration for us to reflect on the fault of grasping at oneself as dear. Here we need to come to recognize the pervasive role that grasping at oneself as dear plays in our life. And we do so by observing the arisal of anger, the arisal of the afflictions, and the impact that those afflictions have on us, and on others. So, for example, anger immediately destroys our own mental peace, and its expression, even if it's just a mere facial expression, serves to keep others away from us, leading to relationships of disharmony, leading to a severe obstacle to being of benefit to others, causing others to ensure they avoid us, don't come into contact with us. We lose we struggle to sleep well, we lose our appetite, and these and many other problems come from the arisal of anger. And we need to also then think about the same with the other afflictions, attachment, pride, and so forth. Recognizing that the suffering we're experiencing comes from the afflictions. And then, when this is clear, look at where do those afflictions come from. That they have this, here we're expressing it as grasping at oneself as dear, one's own wishes needing to be fulfilled. Therefore, anger arises when someone or some situation stands in the way of our wishes being fulfilled. Or attachment arises in order for these wishes and desires to be fulfilled. And thirdly, we also include the impacts that this has life to life. We're experiencing the results of our self-cherishing in past lives, and we will experience the results of our self-cherishing now in our future lives. So here we're reflecting across the expanse of time, but we're first starting with what we're experiencing now, seeing the roles of the afflictions, and in each case recognizing how from the self-cherishing mind, or we can express it as the ignorance of self-grasping, these afflictions arise, and the resulting suffering for ourselves and others. And that this has been the case since beginningless lifetimes and will continue into our future lifetimes too. So this is the meditation here, and it's crucial for us to recognize how it is like a chronic disease. A disease that constantly causes us pain, physical and mental. This we need to recognize vividly. This, what I've just mentioned, is the second line for us as well, that the self-cherishing mind is the cause giving rise to our unsought suffering.
then那这个所觉甚至毛我，那这句甚至所觉话从第几句个的，那甚至所觉比连那个地方不晒过了吧？现在刚刚没这个人就是车上，然后其实用不把的，然后的啊都什么的，好过去吃个多。今天当然这个当然这还没过，但当然就叫我。ले केवा मामा के ले के तो जेबो देना दुआ न्यों है कि छसा केवा मामा ले सब रंग चीज होंगे दूसरे न्यों मोबा के ले साचे दी दुआ न्यों है छाते को देने ता दू समदावे ना रंग चीज ने ले तेने योगयो बदिदा दूसु ना जो रवा de शिंजु चेबने दा तेने से हाको तो यार छालोवा
The second line, the cause giving rise to my unsought suffering. Here we think about this in an expansive way, both in terms of what we have and are directly experiencing, as well as what we perceive throughout the world, recognizing that all warfare, illness, corruption, environmental destruction, deceit, conflict, of all levels has come about from grasping at oneself as dear. Through grasping at oneself as being self-existent, one then wants a self-existent self to have power, to have control, to have influence. From this, conflict follows, whether it's within families or between communities. Or if we take the environmental destruction in our world, this has come about from individuals with some power and influence deciding they're wanting more. It's not enough. They're thinking about my wealth, my reputation, my power, and therefore they will engage in environmentally destructive practices, whether it's fossil fuel extraction or mining or manufacturing. It destroys our earth, pollutes our rivers, pollutes our air. And this has been done because of self-cherishing, thinking about my wealth, my reputation, my power. Many instances, this activity was not engaged in with complete ignorance. All too often there was an understanding of the results that would follow, but these were easily dismissed because of the self-cherishing. Excuses were made and were accepted by those with power and influence because of self-cherishing. Likewise, with the physical abuse of others, whether it's a killing of animals or the abuse of animals or conflict between people, this too comes from self-cherishing. My happiness, first and foremost. And if others are harmed in order for me to have things go my way, that's okay. This we need to, in our reflection, take illustrations from our world as well as what our own lived experience. Because the karma that is experienced by ourselves and others, this was accumulated in past lives by a self-cherishing attitude, or a motivation conjoined with self-cherishing. So there we can we look at in this meditation what we perceive around us, our own experience, and we reflect also on this chronic disease of self-cherishing and how all our unwanted suffering comes from it.
never wasn't a jing to make quality, never so hold somebody Lama Chöpa do some Dutch and some down Cheetah, Ram Chizin, never so good. Much of the jing to somebody do and some Moody some down with his condos on Cheetah. 얘네 권도 손제대 얘네 다생 되지 줘봐 지교라서 얘네 다생 랑지지 얘네 봐 되는세대 다 이거 좋아 그냥 저기 뇌비기엔 쓰고 돼 얘네 뇌비기엔 체보디다 랑지지 다생 되세 디마 매버스기인 담담고데 매버스야 돈나야 지오레스 지다는 좀 진지로 쓰는다네 얘네 라미 미데네 다생 랑지지 매버스야야 아니 지금 라미 진지라고 지에서지 어두스 소리 지고와 지루슈고와
The verse concludes first by blaming it. So here, through the meditation that is followed from these first two lines, we point out our self-cherishing attitude, this consciousness, as being the cause of all our suffering. So the finger points within. This we need to engage in again and again, to overcome this delusion that blames others or external circumstances for our suffering. All our unsought suffering arises from this chronic disease of cherishing ourselves. That is where the finger needs to point. And doing these meditations effectively, we'll naturally, as the line continues, begrudge the self-cherishing, knowing that it is what causes our pain. It and it alone is what causes all our pain. It's what limits our spiritual development, limits the benefit we can be to others. Begrudge it, blame it. This will naturally then lead into the fourth line. May I destroy this great demon of self-grasping. Now clearly recognize the cause of all suffering and pain, of ourselves and others. This is what we need to destroy. And then just like in the first line, the term chronic disease was used, and in the fourth line, great demon is used. These aren't, of course, to be taken literally. Rather, we use the poetry of this verse to invoke a determination to blame and begrudge our true enemy, the self-cherishing attitude.
가슴 코 주시 콜레제 냐바데 코메바서 코강아 제기든 대샤다 대바스 디시고래 제가 당한도 가는 디고르스는 대바스 제바서 그 디견이 가는 중고스는 텔레테니 무도 되는 파 심주 제시바 엔진 말이 바데 텔레 무도 와서 제바치네 파 제바치네 균 그제 안주시네 파 심주 제바들 보고 대바스 난 내내게 제도 한데 가서 다균 차상 다 얘네기 다시 말해 버들 용완자 사상나라야 내가 좀 미로치네 나도 내 미팅 미치기나 소소게 기티나 미콜은 내가 지야서 내가 지 삼바 윤 마치바 여바들 콘진시로와
네 컨진이야 캐코나
샬레 내가 제게 삼로 윤 마치바 주여바는 콘진레가 빼나도 지미 미팅 바샤사 미팅 바샤 미치기 콜을 고고라네 친구가 지세게 고 마가 콜을 내가서야게 삼로지 윤지 무지네 삼로 나는 야저바들 콘진레고 언디나시 다디 교인 감지에 가르치는 것을 다센랑 치즈 말빠들이 이도 지난 디 미디 미하마 마신 탑에 내가 수기 인산되게 삼나라야 랑 치즈에 삼들 내고 매워서야게 삼는 윤튀네 무튀네 삼다들 콘도 송지에 되네 콘도 되려 콘진세의 콜이야 지오고 예세지 콘도 송지에서 디스고 단단하다 예세에 답달이래
가서 The integrity is local, then ni tanda yosanjeki ni yapodu tuche. Just before I come to Genda's translation, commentary, just this third line, there's one word that's not translated. So if we were to change the third line, I mean, the meaning's fine, but so it matches with Genla's commentary. If we were to say, through blaming, resent it. Through blaming, resent it, and may I destroy the great demon of self-grasping. Because there's the one word missing. So the first word that we have, that of blaming it. So this comes about independence on our prior recollection, or looking at the faults of the self-cherishing mind, and blaming it for our suffering, pointing the finger at the actual harm doer who harms us. And then the word that is missing has the meaning of to investigate or to analyze. Like if, for example, something has been stolen, one should not run around just accusing anyone that one sees, but rather investigate and identify the thief. Here, we need to identify what it is that's harming us. And we recognize that it's whom we are now blaming, this consciousness of cherishing oneself. And then we come to the third term, which the normal translation is perhaps better here, that of resentment. So we're blaming this mind of cherishing oneself, grasping at oneself as dear, through having done this analytical investigation. So that's the second word that we don't have in English. And this then we should keep in mind, like one would with the affliction of resentment. If one resents someone or something, this is a mind that's almost ever present. It stays manifest within us, the mind of resentment. Here, of course, it's not referring to an affliction, but it's being used in a poetic sense rather, that we should, with mindfulness and introspection, we should keep in mind the great harm that grasping at oneself as dear serves, in order to, then the fourth line, destroy the great demon of self-grasping. So therefore, in brief, blaming arises from these prior points, which come about in dependence on investigation, the missing word, and we should keep this in mind, like we would with resentment, keep it in mind, the faults of self-cherishing at all times, so that we do not come under the influence of grasping at oneself as dear. An analogy to make this clear is if you think of a predator such as a lion, you would have seen in documentaries how it investigates, and with concentration, so like resentment, it investigates, so it sniffs out its prey, or gains a scent of the prey, and then approaches in a stealthy manner, in other words, through skill, in the best way possible. It approaches its prey from the right direction, so that its scent is not smelt by the prey, and then in this way approaches and it pounces on its prey, destroys its prey. So this is likened to how we need to relate to the grasping at oneself as dear. The concentrated mind that has come about in dependence on correctly identifying or blaming our self-cherishing for all our suffering, which itself has come about in dependence on investigation. So like a lion that uses skill and stealth, we should investigate in a similar way. And like a lion approaching its prey, without any distraction, concentrated, we should remain ever present about the danger that self-cherishing poses and ensure we are not influenced by it. And the final line, may I destroy the great demon of self-grasping. The Tibetan, as in all these lines, concludes with please bless me at the end of the fourth line. Here then this term great demon, the meaning of it is that which greatly harms us, greatly as in it possesses great strength and power and harms us therefore greatly. And that therefore of course is self-grasping. So here we don't hold as our goal to merely circumvent it or reduce it, but to eradicate it completely, destroy it, annihilate it. And we turn to our Lama for blessing or inspiration to have the strength and the skill in order to do so. With these verses and meditations, such as this one, it's important to engage in these meditations repeatedly over a sustained period in order to bring about the change that one longs for. So here, one needs to repeatedly, through analytical meditation, reflect on the faults of grasping at oneself as dear. Merely gaining inspiration from reading or hearing a teaching is insufficient. One needs to reflect on this again and again and read and receive more teachings on it. So that, because to the extent that the faults of grasping at oneself as dear are vividly understood, one will give rise to the aspiration to earnestly apply oneself to eradicate grasping at oneself as dear. If one has a fleeting wish, well, that's good, there's imprints accumulated, but that will not lead to transformation. For transformation to come, one has to apply oneself repeatedly over a sustained period in and out of meditation, using mindfulness introspection to guard oneself against coming under the influence of these dangerous minds, such as grasping at oneself as dear. Then one will have the strength of mind, the confidence to earnestly apply oneself to eradicate it completely.
가로 겁는 매가 수그릴라도 슈로 가려서네 현재가 그거도 고 해서다 슈 뭐소랑 지진 유로도 괜시고래 슈라 디슈라 현재가 그거도 유연시고래 나다 네 제가 현재가 그거도 현재가 그거도 기여나 겁나 아니 공부할 때에 장치들도 또 해서 매가 써야다.
What the verse explicitly presents is the reflection on the faults of grasping at oneself as dear. It does not explicitly present how to do so, but this will naturally arise, this thought will naturally arise. Having reflected well on the faults of grasping at oneself as dear, naturally the thought will arise, I need to destroy this great demon. So therefore, how to do so? And that then is done through developing the contrary mind, holding others dear. Having reflected on the faults of grasping at oneself as dear, the next verses will present the benefits of holding others as dear. Shenchen sin drupna sosaran kangyo chökyi dire ha ale tene ko masa
ran chi sam da gyo mar la ba ta ran chi sam ma da ma di gi gu du na ran ka na se gu du se be sam da gyo mar la gyo ba da di ma ta ba ente na ka na se gu du se be sam da na ran di gi du gu sam ma da na ga nis di gi yung gu re na ka na ga nis se tu gu re na ge di na ka na ya ya cha de sa ro sa be ge sam lu khol si gi ro wa ji.
Reflecting on the other cherishing mind, reflecting on the self-cherishing mind, these aren't thoughts that arise readily to people, but certainly the wish for happiness, the wish for freedom from suffering, this readily arises. So too the thought that, or the recognition that, life is difficult, problem upon problem before me. So these are widely recognized.
rangi chepa chine rangi digi chuya dang dunga se chik samdaya dida shen chepa chine dunga rangi se da rangi digi chuya da su shuk chuya dan shen chepa zinje an chepa zinje lewa ina su su dunga se da digi chuya da shuk che yung kore je rangi chepa zimbe jizin di wange digi chuya da dunga se tablam bena digi chuya da dunga yuaya da
Because there is before even embarking on this practice, a general understanding that we each individually want happiness, want to be free of suffering, but suffering befalls us continuously. Therefore, the reflection required on the faults of the self-cherishing mind is less than the reflection required on the benefits of the other cherishing mind. That way of thinking, of the benefits of holding others as dear, that is quite alien, quite distant from people's general way of thinking. Whereas wanting to be free of suffering, wanting to experience only happiness, this is much more easily understood. So therefore, reflecting on the faults of the self-cherishing mind is much easier to come to an understanding of than to understand or come to a realization of the benefits of the other cherishing mind.
디 토네 레벨나 셴레 고골파야나 아니 셴레 네오지에 용고 말때 용고 말와 가스네 셴 제바지마 셴레 디기 주나 삼바게 된다 이네 자 내가 세베나 장부 이셰베나 장부 넘겨줘봐라 야고돼야 안지 셴레 팔바 강투도 지투에 차도 아니 가래 소수게 장부지는 미 지구리야 아니 미 통이야고 샤고래 소소야 야고 지구래 아니 미 소소를 조금만 알이야 소소를 강아 채वे나 어디 미디야고 홀로로 고치고서 로체 망한 거를 진짜 나도 충분히 삼다些랑 제벌 준비토네 소소이 대기 주위에 삼다면은 이 토네 샤 고고다야다 되다리 마주디 고고다야다 자선시야 용으로와 진짜 니네는 미션다 하고 어디 고고다도 자선시는 윤주시야 마 근데 소소의 센터링아 미마 잘하고라 자 현재바 준비토네 소소게 현재바 준비토네 밀려야지 내가 레벨이나 소식이 팬베이스 지도는 내가 내야지 이시나 정부 아니 야고 지제를 미샤상이 그 정부도 그 미야고도 세배게 소수의 뛰어나야다 아니 소수 미네 소수야 센터에 sem거부처럼 제 소수의 디기를 두고 봐 소수의 내가 된다 두고 봐 진짜 니네서 소수의 디기 두고 해제这先进行团队主办的第一的休息让人让给团队的休息就突破当然这个。
When one grasps at oneself as dear, to the extent that one does so, one will have conflict with others, one will take advantage of others, one will have disharmony with others. These faults are comparatively, when comparing to seeing the benefits of the other cherishing mind, these are comparatively easy to see because we know we don't like to be around someone who's particularly self-centered because we won't trust them. We may well be aware that to achieve their own self-interest, they will take advantage of us. They will deceive us. And conflict may well arise if our aspirations or wishes don't match theirs. So we can readily see those faults, and when we look at ourselves, look within ourselves, we readily too can see the harm that follows from our own self-cherishing attitude. And also when one looks well, one will see how our self-cherishing attitude limits the benefit that we can bring to others. It keeps us from fulfilling our greater aspirations. This is also important to recognize, especially in our own context. Because then when we reflect on the benefits of holding others as dear, we can think about what it would be like to be a person dominated by such an attitude. One will not take advantage of others, one will not harm others. One will easily, therefore, develop harmonious relationships with others, develop close friendships with others easily. Wherever one goes from one's own side, one will feel close to others, whether they are strangers or long-time friends. Readily one will find those who want to offer assistance and help, those who will voluntarily give of themselves to help you, because they take inspiration from you. And others will be much less inclined to want to harm you or take advantage of you. So when one has established such a reputation as being as someone who's sincere and a genuine person, holding the wishes of others first and foremost, it's much easier to have a beneficial impact on others. It's much easier to fulfill the aspirations of the Mahayana when one is guided by the needs of others, because of how they will be open and receptive and relate to you.
나라게 시행에 펜버치 주기 선배게다 디삼도 야네 한데 땅고에 세서 장도를 제대로 당도 고매야돼 나는 주기라 리피티나다 시행 세르베 야포레 시행에 펜버치 주고래 세베 시행에 디기 주나 선배 삼다다 시행 동안다 좌고도 선배 삼다야 시행에 디기 주야다 시행 동안 좌야데 미 강토투 지인 선배게다 디기 삼도데 한데 야네 한데 땅고에 세서 그저 두시네 지나다 랑 제지데 되게 용도와 생각이다 삼다제든 너다 고메 삼다이가 놀러 자야디 시엔야네 햄베지 주기 센터서 시엔 디기 중화나 서중화쇼 선바 시엔 동화다 자화쇼 센터서 시엔 디기 주야디 니 지기 센베 시엔 동화라 자화다 니 탑시 지기 센베 삼도디 딜로 장고 그래서 다지 디 안에 야도 삼당거디
The essence then of what we've looked at tonight is it's imperative to reflect deeply on the faults of grasping at oneself as dear, because this is the indispensable prerequisite to give rise to the wish to hold others as dear. Here there are many steps here. We've spoken about how to reflect on the faults of the self-cherishing attitude. One also, in these meditations, reflects on the qualities of others, the great kindness they've shown us, the benefit they've brought into our lives, directly and indirectly across lifetimes, developing the wish to repay them, developing a sense of closeness to others, feeling of appreciation and tenderness towards others, and developing this to the extent that, as much as one can, I want to relate to others in a way that benefits them, and at the very least, doesn't add to their burden. For this to come about well, through these reflections on equalizing and exchanging, we come, as we saw here tonight, to recognize that it's this chronic disease of cherishing oneself that is the cause giving rise to all our unsought suffering. And this is our true enemy. This is where the finger of blame needs to be pointed. It is this attitude that needs to be resented. To the extent that that becomes vividly clear to us, we recognize that our sole enemy is this consciousness, this way of thinking. It is not others. It's not circumstances or situations. This opens us up to others. It breaks away any feeling of fear or apprehension around others, and opens us up to being able to develop an attitude that truly cherishes or values others. It's a crucial meditation, and I encourage you, with the ones we've looked at in preceding weeks, to include this in your daily reflection. Then thank you very much, and we'll conclude there for tonight. Thank you.